Hey everyone, welcome back. In this video, we're going to prepare the After Effects file for animation. But before starting animation process, let's do some modifications on timeline layers to have a cleaner timeline, and also it will help us to animate objects faster and easier. So let's get started. First of all, hold the Ctrl key and click on these numbers to change the display type to show the frame numbers instead of timecode. I want to have an animation with 300 frames, so let's go to frame 299, that with frame 0 we will have 300 frames. Now press the N key to move the work area and handle to this timeline indicator position. Now right click on this narrow bar and choose Trim Comp to Work Area. Or from the menu choose Composition, Composition Settings, or press Ctrl K. And here set the duration to 300 frames. Okay, now let's select the body layer, press the P key to load the position property, and let's move it to the center of the composition in X direction. So, for the position X enter 960, and for the position Y enter 520. When you want to animate an object in After Effects, I recommend you to use a null object instead of adding keyframes directly to the object layer. So, from the menu choose Layer, New, Null Object. Null object is an auxiliary object which cannot be rendered in After Effects. Okay, select it, hit Return key and rename it to Transform. Okay, if I zoom in a little bit, here you can see the anchor point in this corner. I want to move it to the center of the null object, so press the Ctrl, Alt and Home keys. Okay. Now let's change the position to, for example, enter 960 for X and 630 for Y. Okay. Now I want to parent this body layer to transform layer, so activate parent and link column. And for the body layer, drag this pick whip icon over the transform layer. Now as you can see, if I move transform layer, the body layer and other layers will be moved as well. Okay, now let's make all these layers 3D. So select all of them and click on this 3D cube. And let's do the same process for these sky and circles layers. And then lock them again. Okay, now I want to create some pre-comps to make our timeline a little bit cleaner with fewer layers. So let's select this sharp highlight and body highlight. And then right click and choose Precomp. You can think about Precomp as a group. In fact, when we make a Precomp from several layers, it's like that we make a group from those layers. And when we move or add some effects to that Precomp, all layers that are inside the Precomp will be moved, and the effects will be applied to all those layers as well. Now let's rename this Precomp to Highlights and hit OK. And make a precomp from this body gradient and rename it body gradient. Activate this leave all attributes and press the OK button. Okay, again layer mode is not correct for this layer, so open the body gradient precomp and activate mode column, and let's change it to hard light again. Okay, close the precomp, and now it's corrected in the main composition. Okay, activate Rasterize option for highlights layer. Let's precomp the Windows layer as well. Rename it to Windows and leave all attributes active and press the OK button. Precomp the body layer as well. Let's precomp the wing right and wing left. And now let's move these two wing layers under the body composition to have a tidier and cleaner timeline. Okay, now activate parent and link column. And make sure all rocket layers and precomps are parented to the body precomp. It seems we need to parent this highlights precomp to the body precomp. Okay. I think it's better to make the body layer a little bit smaller, so let's change the scale value to 50%. Okay, it's better now. And finally, let's organize this project window. So let's select all these precomps we have created recently and make a folder of them and rename it to precomps. I highly recommend you to always keep your file structure and project window organized. Try to name your layers correctly and create separate folders for your programs, footage, imported videos, images, and audio files. Okay, and finally we are ready to start the animation process. I want to start animating the rocket from frame 30 because I want to add some effects and small animations to the environment before the rocket enters the screen. For animating the rocket, I'm going to use this transform layer. So select it and open position property by pressing the P key. At the beginning of the animation, I want this rocket to be outside at the bottom of the screen. So hold the spacebar key and click to pan. And let's move the rocket to somewhere like here, or even lower, maybe here. Let's enter round numbers, for example 2000 and 2000 for X and Y. And now click on this stopwatch to create a keyframe at frame 30 for this position. Okay, let's go a few frames forward, for example to frame 75. And let's move the rocket to somewhere like here, to the left. And let's enter round numbers, for example 1100 for X position and 450 for Y position. Let's go a few frames forward again, maybe frame number 130. Move it to the left, around here. And let's enter 750 and 700. Okay. Let's go to frame 200. Move it to the right and let's enter 1100. And for the Y position, let's move it to the top, for example 570. And finally, let's go to frame, for example, 265. And in this frame, let's move it out of the screen. Let's pan a little bit. And move it to somewhere like here. For example, 100 for X position. And let's move it a little bit higher. For example, let's enter negative 700 for Y position. As you can see, our rocket rises from this point. We will have a rotation here at the center of the screen, and finally it will go out from this point. Okay, now I want to modify this path to have a smooth rotation here. So select all these keyframes, right click and choose Keyframe Interpolation. And here for these two drop-down boxes, let's choose Bezier option. Okay, as you can see now, we have two handles in each keyframe. I want to modify this path to have a nice circle shape here. So let's use this Convert Vertex tool and select this fourth tool. And now click and drag on this keyframe to create a nice curve shape here. In fact, I'm looking to make a circular shape. If you want to move these keyframes on the screen, use Selection tool. Let's move this keyframe a little bit to the right to have a smooth circular path here. And you can move the handles as well. To be able to move the handles separately, hold the Alt key and click and drag the handle. Okay, I think we have a nice circular form here. Okay, now let's play the animation to see what we have so far. Let's go to frame 25. And then press the B key to snap the work area start handle to this frame. Now hold the Shift key and click somewhere around frame 265. After Effects will snap the timeline indicator to the nearest keyframe, which is frame 265. And then press the N key to snap the work area end handle to this frame. Now After Effects will only play the animation between frames 25 and 265. Okay, now I want to play a ramp preview, so let's decrease the resolution. This will create ramp preview faster. In Preview panel, we can set a shortcut for playing the ramp preview. By default, the shortcut is a spacebar, but you can change it to Shift, a spacebar, or numpad, and so on. I prefer to use a spacebar key. Now, you can press the spacebar key or press this play stop button. Okay, it's good for the first try. But we can make it more interesting. I think it's better to have different speeds in some positions. Let me show you something. If you look closer to this animation path, you can see some dots here. With these small dots on the path line, we can identify where the speed is high and where the speed is low. Where the spaces between these dots are getting smaller, it means the speed is decreasing. Now I want this rocket to enter the screen at high speed, so here the distance between these points is greater. And the closer it gets to this circular shape, the lower the speed. And as you can see, the points are getting closer to each other. And when it goes out of this circle, I want it to speed up. And as you can see, the distance between these points increases. Okay, let me change the handle of this keyframe a little bit to change the animation path. Let's scribe in timeline. Okay, and maybe it's better to change it a little bit as well. Okay, it comes from here, rotate, and exit. Now I want to modify the speed of the rocket. To do this, select the position property and click on this graph editor button. Here in graph editor we have two axes. Vertical axis shows the speed value. It shows a speed value by pixel per second scale. And we have a horizontal axis that shows the frame number, or in fact time. Here we have a curve that shows the speed of the motion. Make sure you are in edit speed graph mode. Also, we have another mode called value graph that shows the value of keyframes. I don't want to change it, so let's switch back to edit speed graph mode. Okay. I want my rocket to have a high speed when it enters the screen here around frame 50. So I want to have a high speed in frame 50, and the speed will gradually decrease as it approaches the circle. So let's lower this keyframe so that at the beginning of the move in frame 30 we have a speed with 0 value. The speed will gradually increase until frame 50. Now let's move this handle to right a little bit. Now move the handle of the second keyframe to the left to have a peak around frame 50. Okay, now as you can see here, the spaces between these dots are changing as I move this handle to the left and right. Now the rocket will have a higher speed in frame 50, and when it gets closer to frame 75, the speed gradually decreases, and as you can see, the speed graph reflects this motion nicely. Okay, now let's move and modify handles of these keyframes to have a smooth speed transition in these keyframes. At the bottom of the graph, as you can see, we have almost a flat line that forces our rocket to move at constant speed. And after frame 200, I want to speed up the rocket again. So let's bring down this last keyframe and move the handle to the left. And finally, let's move the right handle of the fourth keyframe to the right to have a nice and smooth speed transition in this keyframe. Maybe it's better to move this handle to the left even more. I think it's okay now. Okay, now as you can see, the space between the points gradually decreases, which means our speed also decreases. Here in this circle, we have almost a constant speed, and you can see that the distance between the points is the same. And when the rocket wants to leave this circle, as you can see, the space between the points increases, which indicates that the speed of the rocket is also increasing. Okay, great. Let's press the spacebar key to see a ramp preview for this animation. Okay, nice result. We can change the form of the animation path a little bit. For example, let's move the handle of this bottom keyframe. Something like this. Let's see the result. Okay, I think it's okay for now. If you need, you can change it again later. Okay, now if you want to move the animation path to another place on the screen, simply click on Position Property to select all of its keyframe, and now you can click on one of these keyframes in Composition window and move the animation path, and you can put it wherever you like. Okay, now I want to add a rotation to this rocket in this path. In fact, I want to align this rocket to the path at the beginning and ending of the animation. And when it's inside this circle path, I want to change the rotation. So, select the transform layer, press the R key to load the rotation properties. And here I want to rotate this rocket in Z axis, so let's keyframe this Z rotation value. But before adding more keyframes to this layer, let's add some markers to this composition to find keyframes easier. So, hold the Shift key and click around frame 30 to snap timeline indicator to this frame. Deselect the transform layer. Now from the menu, choose Layer, Markers, Add Marker, or press the star key on your numpad. Okay, we have a marker here. Now let's go to frame 75 and press the star key on your numpad. And do the same for the other keyframes as well. Remember that if a layer is selected in timeline, when you press the star key, After Effects will add that marker to the selected layer. Now again select the transform layer, press the R key, and let's go to frame 30 and let's see the rocket at this frame. I want to align the rocket to the animation path, so let's rotate it here. Let's change the Z rotation to, for example, -25. And create a keyframe here. Let's go to frame 75 and change it to 30. After Effects will create a keyframe here automatically. And go to frame 130 and let's reverse the rotation value, maybe 10. Okay. Let's go to frame 200. Reverse the rotation again to, for example, I think -50 is okay. And in frame 265, let's rotate it to find the best value. Maybe 0 is okay. Or maybe -15. Okay, let's modify the handle a little bit. Okay, now let's see a run preview. Okay, it seems we need to modify Z rotation keyframes and curves a little bit. So let's select all rotation keyframes and right-click Keyframe Assistant and select Easy Ease or press F9. Okay, now while all rotation keyframes are still selected, switch to Graph Editor window. Here only select Z rotation property to show its keyframes. And now I want to modify keyframe handles. But this time, make sure we are in Edit Value Graph mode. Now if I click on the handle, as you can see, only this handle moves. In fact, they move separately from each other. If you want to move these two handles together, you have to use this Convert Vertex tool. Click and then drag to create and move handles together at the same time. Okay, let's move these handles a little bit to have a nice and smooth transition in Z rotation path in each keyframe. For the third keyframe, we can click and drag, and here let's add a little bit overshoot. It means we will pass the value after frame 130 a little bit more, and then it will decrease again. And let's add a little bit overshoot in frame 200 as well. So click and drag and change the handle's angle to make an overshoot after frame 200. So it will rotate a little bit more after frame 200 and then the rotation will change to a positive value again. Here I think we can change the handle's angle a little bit. Let's find the best angle for handles. Okay, I think it's not a bad idea to add keyframe here in frame 222. Let's open Graph Editor again to see what we have here. Okay, it seems we need to change the handles here, so click and drag with Convert Vertex tool and okay. I think it's better now. Let's see a run preview again. Okay, as a final touch, let's add a little bit offset to our rotation animation. This will improve our final result. So, select Transform Layer and press the U key to load all keyframed properties. Now select all Z rotation keyframes and hold Alt and Shift keys and press the left arrow key on your keyboard to move and offset your keyframes 10 frames to the left. Now move the work area start handle to be before the first frame. And now let's see this result. Okay, great. Okay, as the first step, let's work on these fire layers and let's add a wiggle animation to each layer to simulate a fire effect. But before that, let's talk about anchor point. So let's zoom in a little bit and let's increase the resolution. When I select one of these fire layers, as you can see, the anchor point is here on the center of the layer. Let me change the color to make it more obvious, for example, purple. Okay, Now here you can see the anchor point. I want to scale the fire from the top point, somewhere around here, and scale it in this direction only. So the anchor point shouldn't be here, because if I scale it, it will be scaled from the center. I want this fire layer to be scaled from this top point. To do this, I want to use this pan behind tool or press the Y key. So put your mouse over this green axis and move the anchor point in Y direction until you get to this top point. Okay, now let's do the same process for these two other fire layers. Activate pan behind tool and move the anchor point to the top. And again for the last fire layer. And now if I scale this fire 1 layer, as you can see, it will be scaled from the top and not the center. Okay, now I want to animate these fire layers using a wiggle effect that is controlled by one slider. To do this, let's add a null object. Hit return key and rename it to control. We can move this null object to the corner of the screen. Let's put it here. Okay. Now from the menu, choose Effect, Expression Controls, a slider control. Okay, now click on this small lock button to hold this panel open for the control layer. Click on a slider control property and hit return key and rename it to, for example, Fire Scale. Okay, now I want to control the scale property of these fire layers by this Fire Scale slider. So, as the first step, select the layer and press the S key to load the scale property. Click here to hide this chain button to be able to change the scale values separately in X, Y, and Z directions. I want to animate this fire only in Y direction, so we have to hold the X and Z values constant on 100%. So, hold the Alt key and click on this stopwatch. After Effects will create a script for this property automatically. Let's delete it. Okay. I want to animate the scale in Y direction using a wiggle effect that will add random values to a scale Y and it will simulate a fire effect for us. A wiggle expression in After Effects is a piece of JavaScript code that allows to move, scale, and rotate a layer back and forth in a random fashion. So let's write several lines of code here. We need a variable, let's name it wig. Wig equals to wiggle25. The first parameter is frequency that defines the number of times your layer will wiggle per second, this case 25 times. Now add a comma and then 15. This second parameter is amplitude that defines how much it will move up and down, this case 15 pixels. And finally add a semicolon and hit return key. Here we have three parameters for the scale X, Y, and Z. I don't want to change the scale X and Z. The X-axis is to the right and the Z-axis is perpendicular to the plane and outwards. So let's type an open bracket for the first parameter that is scale X, and as I told you before, I don't want to change it, so let's enter 100%. Now when I want to use wiggle effect as the second parameter, so I have to write wig open bracket 1 close bracket. It means we control the scale Y with the wiggle effect. And finally, let's write 100% as a scale Z value. Okay, by default, we can't animate the wiggle effect. To solve this problem, I can multiply the scale value with a number, and I control this number by this Fire Scale slider control. So let's multiply this scale script by the slider value. Click and drag this pick whip icon over the Fire Scale slider. Now After Effects will multiply our current scale value by a number that is defined in this slider. Okay, great. Now my slider value is 0, so my scale will be 0. Why? Because I have multiplied the scale value by a 0 number. Now if I scale it up, let's enter 0.2. So my scale will be multiplied by 0.2. Let's multiply it by 0.5. This is the result. Okay. If I multiply it by 1, now we have 100% for the scale value. And if I multiply it by 2, my fire layer will be scaled 200%. Okay, for now, let's leave it at number 0. Okay, let's use this code for other two fire layers. So copy this script and then select these two fire layers and press the S key. Okay, hold the Alt key and click on the stopwatch. Delete this script and paste the code here. And for the third fire layer, follow the same process. Okay. Now we control the wiggle and scale values by this slider. Okay, now let me change the color for these layers, for example, blue. So let's go to frame, for example, 75 and change the slider value to 1. And let's add a keyframe here by clicking on this stopwatch. Now let's go a few frames forward, for example, frame 120, and change it to 0.25. And as you can see, our fire layers are getting smaller. Okay, let's go to frame 200 and change the slider value to, for example, 1.5. Okay, let's change the resolution and now let's see a RAM preview to see what we have now. Okay, great. Now let's modify our animation a little bit. So select Control Layer, press the U key to load all keyframes, select these keyframes, Keyframe Assistant, Easy Ease, or press F9. Okay, now let's make this fire animation a little more interesting by adding some keyframes to have the effect of increasing and decreasing the fire scale when the rocket is in this circle path. So let's go to frame, for example, 130 and change the slider value to 0.35. Let's go 5 frames forward and set it to 1. In frame 140, change it to, for example, 0.1. For frame 145, let's enter 1.5. In frame 150, change it to 0.2. For frame 155, enter 1. And for frame 160, let's enter 0.2. We can change the wiggle parameters for our 3 fire layers to have different random scale values. So for fire 1 layer, that is our white fire layer, press the U key 2 times. Now let's change the wiggle parameters to 15 and, for example, 10. For fire 2, let's enter 20 and 15. And finally, for fire 3, let's enter 30 and 20. I love this effect of increasing and decreasing the fire scale. This adds a little more detail to our animations. Okay, we don't need to see control layer on the screen, so we can hide it from this corner. Okay, now let me show you how to add a camera and distribute these layers in real 3D space in After Effects. First of all, let's change active camera to custom view 1. Now press the C key on the keyboard or click on this unified camera tool. And as you can see, all of our objects are in a single plane. If you left click and drag, you can rotate or orbit the camera around the layers. If you right click and drag your mouse, you can zoom in and zoom out the camera. And if you middle click and drag your mouse, you can pan to the left and right. Okay, I want to distribute these layers in 3D space, so let's start from the bottom layers. Unlock the sky and circles layers. Select the sky layer and press the P key to load the position property. Let's change the Z position value to push back it in 3D space. For example, let's enter 500 for Z position. Okay, it's a proper position. Now let's move the circle layer to back. And for Z position, let's enter 400. For cloud 3, let's change it to 200. For cloud 2 layer, change it to, let's change the Z position for cloud 3. It should be 300. And for cloud 2 layer, change it to 200. Now, as you can see, our layers are distributed in 3D space. If you click on this camera button, you can see different options for the camera. For example, if you select Track XY camera tool, as I told you before, you can move camera in a XY plane, something like you pan the camera. If you choose Unified Camera tool, you have all these cameras transform tools in your hand. Just use left click, right click, or middle click to access each tool. Or you can press the C key to switch between them. Okay, now I want to move top clouds layers. For top cloud 1, let's leave it in its current position. For top cloud 2, let's change Z position to, for example, 400. And for top cloud 3, let's change the Z position to 250. Okay, now as you can see, we have a nice distance between our objects in 3D space. Okay, great. Now let's switch back to our main view, active camera view. Okay, as you can see, because I pushed back these layers, we need to scale them up to cover the entire screen again, especially for the sky layer. So let's change the scale for a sky layer to, for example, 130. Change the scale value for circles layer to 110. And for cloud 2 and cloud 3, let's change the scale to 110. Okay, great. Okay, now I want to animate these layers in X-axis. So select the top cloud 1 layer and let's go to frame 0. Let's change X position to 350 and set the keyframe here. Then let's go to the last frame and change the X position to, for example, 500. Now for the top cloud 2 in frame 0, let's enter 1000. Set a keyframe. Let's go to the last frame and change it to, for example, 1050. Now for top cloud 3 in frame 0, let's enter 1600. Set a keyframe. Go to the last frame and change it to, for example, 1700. Okay, now I want to give the scene a little more 3D feel. To do this, I'm going to add shadows to our cloud layers. So let's select cloud 1 layer and from the menu choose Effect, Perspective, Drop Shadow. Okay, for the shadow color, let's pick a dark blue color from the sky. You can also choose a black color, it's up to you. Let's increase the distance, for example, 50. Let's increase the softness value because, as you know, clouds don't create sharp shadows. So increase it to 75. And let's change the direction to 75. Okay. You can decrease the opacity if you like, for example, 40. And let's change the color to maybe a little bit darker blue. Okay. Now I want to apply these shadow settings to another cloud layer. So select this shadow effect and from the menu choose Edit, Copy. Now let's select cloud 2 and paste the effect. Okay, now let's animate these 3 cloud layers. So select cloud 1 and let's go to frame 0. Open the position property and set a keyframe here. And let's enter a round number, for example, 900. Let's go to the last frame and change the X position to, for example, 1100. Okay, now I want to animate cloud 2 in opposite direction to add a little bit diversity. So in frame 0, set a keyframe, enter 700 for X position, and go to the last frame. I decrease the X position because I want to move it in opposite direction of the cloud 1. So let's enter 600. Now let's scrub in timeline. Okay, as you can see, they are moving in opposite directions. Okay, now for cloud 3 in frame 0, add a keyframe. Enter 1250 for X position. And for the last keyframe, let's enter 1300. Okay, let's add a new layer to our clouds. So select cloud 1 and from the menu choose Edit, Duplicate or press Ctrl D. Let's change the position a little bit. So select all position keys by clicking on Position Property. Click and drag the layer in Z axis and bring it forward somewhere like here. Okay. Now if I scrub in timeline, as you can see, cloud 1 and cloud 4 are moving in the same direction. But I want to reverse the direction for cloud 4. So select all keyframes again and right click and choose Keyframe Assistant, Time Reverse Keyframes. Now they are moving in opposite directions. Now let's change Cloud 4 a little bit to have different look. So unlink the scale property and change the scale X from 100% to negative 100%. Okay. Let's also change the color of Cloud 1. So from the menu, choose Effect, Generate, Fill. Immediately, After Effects adds a red color to it. Let's pick a color from Cloud 4 and then let's change it a little bit to a bright gray. Okay, now as you can see, the shadow color of this cloud is changed as well because the fill effect is below the shadow effect. So simply drag this fill effect over the shadow effect. Okay, now I want to apply a new effect to our clouds to have more motion on the screen, and this will add more details to our animation. So select Cloud 1 and in Effects and Preset panel, find Turbulent Displace effect and apply it to the layer. Let's close these effects. Now change the size value to 50. Hold the Alt key and click on the Evolution stopwatch. Delete this script and enter time times 30. Now if I scrub in timeline, as you can see, the form of the Cloud 1 layer is changing. Okay, let's do the same process for Cloud 4. Add the Turbulent Displace, change the size to 50, and add the script to Evolution property, time times 35. Because this cloud is closer to the camera, so the turbulent effect should be more obvious. Follow the same process for Cloud 2, and for the script, enter time times 20. And let's apply this effect to the Cloud 3 layer as well, and for the script, enter time times 10. Okay, now I want to add and animate a camera, so from the menu, choose Layer, New, Camera. Here I leave the settings as they are. Okay, now let's go to frame 0 and open the position property, and let's change the Z position to, for example, negative 2700. Go to the last frame and change the Z position to negative 2500. Now as you can see, we have a slow movement into space in Z direction. To simulate the effect of a splitting cloud when the rocket exits from behind the cloud. So let's create a new composition or press Ctrl N. Rename it to Cloud Rocket. Leave all settings as they are and press the OK button. Okay, now in Animate Composition, double click on Body Composition to open it up. Select this layer and copy it into memory. And paste it in Cloud Rocket composition. And let's rename the layer to Cloud Rocket. Now I want to move this anchor point from the center to this bottom point. So click on Pan Behind tool or press the Y key. And now hold the Ctrl key to activate the snap mode. Now you can simply snap the anchor point to these points. In this case, I want to snap it to this middle bottom point. Okay, now I want to animate this object. I want it to come from the bottom to the center of the screen and go back down again. So let's go to frame 0. Create a keyframe here and lower it a little. For example, 1300. In frame 50, let's bring it up to 800. Now let's go to frame, for example, 75 and again bring it down to, for example, 1000. Okay. Select these two last keyframes and convert them to easy ease. And leave the first frame on linear type. Let's take a look at Graph Editor. Okay, great. Let's go to frame 100 and press the N key to move the work area and handle to this frame. Now I want to add a wiggle effect to position and rotation properties of this object. So hold the Alt key and click on Position Stopwatch. And let's add a wiggle code here. Wiggle 5 and 2. Now let's add a wiggle effect to rotation as well. So press the R key and add a wiggle code to this property as well by holding the Alt key and clicking on rotation property. Now for this wiggle, let's type wiggle 10 and 5. Now you can see a nice wiggle effect for this object. Okay, now I want to animate the scale property, so press the S key, go to frame 50, and unlink the scale. Create a keyframe here. Let's increase the scale X here a little bit, so let's change it to 125. Now let's go to frame, for example, 85, and change the scale X to 300, and change scale Y to 75. Okay, I think it's better to bring it down even more. So open position property, and in frame 75, change position Y to 1100. Okay, we can change it if needed. Okay, now let's animate the opacity property. So in frame 50, opacity should be 100%. And in frame 85, let's change it to 0. Okay, and then convert these two keyframes to easy ease type. Okay, press the U key to see all the keyframed properties. It seems I forgot to convert scale keyframes to easy ease, so let's do it now. Let's scrub in timeline to see the result. Okay, great. Now I want to add a few effects to this object, but instead of adding effects directly to the object layer, I'm going to use an adjustment layer. If I click on this toggle transparency grid button, you can see that this adjustment layer is transparent. For your information, adjustment layer is a transparent layer and it applies effects to all its underlying layers. Okay, let's rename it to effects. The first effect I want to add is fill effect. So from the menu, choose effect, generate, fill. As you can see, this adjustment layer applies the red fill color to its underlying layer. I don't want this red color, so let's change it to, for example, bright gray. Now let's add a box blur effect. So in effects and preset panel, let's find it. Type fast. Yes, here it is. While the effects layer is still selected, double click on this effect to apply it to the layer. Okay. Let's change the blur radius to 5 and change the iterations to 5 as well. Okay. Now I want to add another effect called turbulent displays. Apply it to adjustment layer. And for amount value, enter 25 and change the size value to 50. And let's increase the complexity to, for example, 2.5. Okay, let's scrub in timeline. Okay, nice result. Okay, now I want to add another effect to create more cloudy style to the object. So find the scatter effect and apply it to the adjustment layer. And increase the amount value to, for example, 150. To have a better look for a scatter effect, we have to move it above the fastbox blur effect. So we can put it above fastbox blur or even before fill effect. In After Effects, when an effect is below another effect, it means bottom effect will change the effect of top layer. In this case, fastbox blur will blur the scatter effect. If I put a scatter effect below the fastbox blur, as you can see, we have sharp dots around the object, because fastbox blur cannot affect the bottom layers. So we have to put the scatter effect on top of fastbox blur effect. Okay, let's see the result. Okay, great. Now I want to add another effect. This time I want to apply it directly to the object layer. In fact, I want to split this cloud object into two sections from this top point, and the rocket will come out from the middle of these splitted parts. So to do this, I will use an effect called split. Let's apply this CC split to the cloud rocket layer. Okay. Increase the split value to 100. Then click on this button and then click here on top of the cloud rocket layer to put the point A here. Then click on this button and put the point B to somewhere like here. Okay. Let's enter round numbers. For the X value, enter 960 and 200 for point A to be here. And for the point B, let's enter 960 and 0 to be here on top of the composition window. Okay, make sure to activate this Rasterize button for cloud rocket layer. because if you don't activate it, we will have another effect that is not what we are looking for. Okay, now in frame around 45, I want to animate the point A, so let's create a keyframe here. And let's go to frame, for example, 65. I want to increase it to, for example, 700. Now, if I scrub in timeline, you can see the result. Okay. Press the U key and convert these keyframes to easy ease. Okay, great. Now let's see what will happen if Rasterize button is off. Yes, a weird effect. This is not what we are looking for, so make sure to activate it. Okay, we have completed this section as well. Now we can go back to the main animate composition. Okay, now let's add rocket cloud composition to animate composition and drag it under the cloud 1 layer. Let's change the layer color and let's find the exact frame that the cloud is splitted. Yes, maybe around frame 57. Now move the layer to here where the rocket comes out from behind the clouds. Also, we need to rotate it a little bit. And I think we need to offset the layer in timeline to find the best frame. I want to have the cloud to be splitted exactly when the rocket comes out from behind the clouds. I think it's okay now. So let's see a ramp preview just for this section. So let's move this work area and handle to somewhere like this frame, 85. Okay, I think it's better to tweak it a little bit more. So let's bring it down even more in frame 75, for example, to 1300. And maybe we need to move point A a little bit more in frame 65. Let's change it to 1000. Okay, now let's go back to animate composition and see another ramp preview. Okay, but I think this split effect is too much, so let's decrease it. Maybe it's better to change point A Y position to 800. Another ramp preview. Okay, it's better now. But we can reduce the speed as well, so let's select all these right keyframes, hold the Alt and Shift keys and press the right arrow key to move these keyframes 10 frames to the right. Let's open Animate Composition again to see a ramp preview. Okay, maybe it's better to offset this composition a little bit. Activate this toggle mask and shape path visibility to see active layer in composition window. And maybe it's better to change the rotation a little bit as well. Maybe -21. I think it's better to put it between cloud 1 and cloud 4 to remove the shadow effect of cloud 1 over this small cloud and combine it with cloud 1. We can add a fill effect to this cloud rocket composition and assign a color that is identical to cloud 1 layer. So apply a fill effect to cloud rocket layer. Now pick a color from cloud 1 by eyedropper tool. Now we have same color for these two clouds. Okay, cloud 4 is closer to the camera, so I want to add a blur effect to it. So find Fastbox Blur, apply it to cloud 4 layer, and change the blur radius to 5, and for iterations enter 5. Now it seems it's out of focus of the camera. Nice effect. You can reduce this blur effect, it's up to you. And let's apply this effect to cloud 1 as well. So let's copy the effect and paste it over the cloud 1 layer. And let's decrease this effect a little bit, change blur radius and iterations to 3. Okay, I think it's great now. Okay, now I want to add a few lines behind the rocket to emphasize its speed and power. So let's choose Pen tool, change fill option to none, and for the stroke color choose white, and set stroke size to 3. Okay, now click here, and then click somewhere around here to create a line. As you can see, After Effects creates a shape layer here, and let's rename it to line 1. Let's change its color to be visible easily on the blue background. Let's zoom in a little bit. Let's move it to a correct position. Okay. This is the anchor point of this line shape, so press the Ctrl, Alt, and Home keys to move it to the center of the shape. Now I want to animate this line, so open it and click on this Add arrow and select this Trim Path effect. Okay, now it's time to animate, so open Trim Path 1. Here we have two options, Start and End. You can animate the line with these two parameters. Let's zoom in a little bit to see what they are doing. With End parameter, we can control the endpoint, and with the Start parameter, we can animate the start point of the line. Let's create a keyframe for End here in frame 205 with 0 value. Go to frame 225 and change it to 100%. Scrub in timeline to see the effect. Okay. Now for a start property in frame 210, add a keyframe and change its value to 0. And let's go to frame 230 and change it to 100%. To see what's happening here, let's solo this layer by clicking on this solo button. Okay, as you can see, we have a nice and simple animation for this line shape. To make it a little bit more interesting, select last keyframes and right click and keyframe assistant, easy ease. Now open graph editor. And now select and drag these two handles to the left. Okay, this is the result. Okay, let's adjust the angle of the line. So select the Convert Vertex tool. Hold the Ctrl key and click and drag this endpoint. It's better to put this line shape layer under all rocket layers, so drag it under Fire 3 layer. Now it's behind the Fire layers as well. Okay, let's move the anchor point, so activate the Pan Behind tool and hold the Ctrl key and snap it to this corner. Now, to create more lines, simply duplicate this line. Press the R key and change the rotation property for this new line. And let's change its position to somewhere like here. Let's scrub in timeline to see the result. Okay. I think it's not a bad idea to add another line shape in the middle of these two lines. So duplicate line 2. Now we have line 3 shape. Now move this line to the middle of the other two lines. And let's use Convert Vertex tool. Hold the Alt key and move the last point to increase the length of this line. Okay, also we can add offset between these lines, so select all of them and press the U key. Now select these keyframes, hold the Alt key and press the right arrow key 2 times to offset these keyframes. And then add 2 frames offset to line 3 shape layer keyframes. Okay, now let's add 2 spiral lines as well. This will add more details to our animation. So activate Pen tool. Let's go to frame 205. Now using Pen tool, click and drag several times to create a spiral line shape. Hold the Ctrl key, move handles and point positions to create a nice and a smooth spiral shape. Let's change the layer color to be able to see it better. Okay, let's rename it to line 4 and put it under Fire layers as well. Okay, now I want to copy animation from one of these line shapes and paste it over line 4 shape. So open Trim Path 1 from line 3 shape. Copy it into memory. Go to frame, for example, 205. Now select line 4 layer and paste the animation. Now press the U key to see the keyframes. But let's move the anchor point to this corner. Now we can duplicate this spiral line. Open a scale property by pressing the S key. And unlink this scale chain button. Change scale Y to -100. And now change the rotation to find the best angle. And let's align it with the rocket body and line 4 shape. Okay, we can offset these line 4 and line 5 layers a little bit in timeline. Okay, now I want to add a vignette effect to this motion graphics. It improves the final result. So let's create a solid layer, select a black color, and click on this Make Comp Size button. Then rename it to Vignette. Now I want to add a mask to this layer. So while this solid layer is still selected, activate Ellipse tool and then double click on Ellipse tool to create a mask for this layer. Now activate this inverted checkbox to invert the mask. And now increase the mask feather to, for example, 500. And decrease the opacity to 25%. Now you can see the difference by turning off and on this layer. First of all, let's go to frame 0. Select transform layer and press the U key to load all keyframed properties, in this case, position and Z rotation. I want to bring the rocket object to the center of the composition in frame 0. Okay, now I want to create a 3D wing layer. Here we have two wing compositions. I don't want this wing left, so let's delete it. Select wing right and hit return key and rename it to wing 1. Now double click on it to open its composition. Let's change the resolution to full. Select this wing layer and turn on the Rasterize option. Let's rename the layer to Wing Center. Okay, now I want to add a null object, so from the menu choose Layer, New, Null Object, rename it to Controller. Now from the menu choose Effect, Effect Controls or press F3. Click on this lock button to hold this panel open while I'm working with other layers. Now let's add a slider to it, so from the menu choose Effect, Expression Controls, a Slider Control, and rename it to Rotation Control. Now I need a camera as well, because I want to orbit around this wing in this composition. So from the menu choose Layer, New, Camera, and leave the settings as they are. Okay, as the first step, I want to move the anchor point of this wing object to the bottom. I want to put the anchor point at this position under this corner of the wing. So select the pan behind tool and move the anchor point to this position. Let's zoom in to find the best place. Now let's change the layer color to, for example, blue. Okay, now let's duplicate this layer. So select it and from the menu choose Edit, Duplicate or hit Ctrl D. Let's rename it to Wing T1 or Wing Top 1. Change the layer color to yellow. Now duplicate this layer 4 more times to have 5 duplicated layers. Now let's duplicate Wing Center again. Bring it down. Change the layer color to, for example, purple. And rename it to Wing Down 1 or Wing D1. Now duplicate it 4 more times. And let me rearrange the layers to have Wing D1 layer at the top and Wing D5 layer at the bottom. Now I want to add a fill effect to this Wing Center layer. So from the menu choose Effect, Generate, Fill. I leave its color to red for now. Okay, now for this controller layer, I want to change the slider value to 0.5. Okay, now I want to change the rotation of these yellow layers, but each layer will have its own rotation from the bottom layer minus this slider value. Okay, first of all, let's select all layers by pressing Ctrl A and make all these layers 3D. And now select this Wing Center layer and all of these yellow layers. Press the R key to load the rotation property. Okay, now to see what I'm doing here, let's switch the camera to Custom View 1. Press the C key to change the camera tool and orbit around the objects. As you can see, when I change the X rotation of a layer, it rotates around X axis and this will add a 3D look to our wing. Okay, as I told you before, I want each layer takes its X rotation from the bottom layer and then I want to minus it by the slider value. So hold the Alt key and click on this X rotation of Wing T1 layer. Delete this code and to connect this X rotation to the bottom layer, click and drag this pick clip icon over the X rotation of the bottom layer. Then type a minus and again drag peak whip icon over the rotation control slider. Now as you can see, wing center X rotation is 0 and the rotation of wing T1 is 0 minus the slider value which is 0.5. So it will be negative 0.5 degrees. If I zoom in a little bit in composition window, you can see that wing T1 is rotated negative 0.5 degrees. And if I change the slider value, its rotation will be changed. Now let's follow the same process for the other yellow layers. So hold the Alt key and click on X rotation of wing T2 and delete this code. And drag this peak whip icon over the X rotation of the bottom layer, which is wing T1. Add a minus sign and drag peak whip icon over the slider value. Now as you can see, X rotation of wing T2 is 0.5 degrees less than wing T1 X rotation. So it will be negative 1 degree. In fact, each layer is 0.5 degrees different from the previous layer. Okay, let's continue the process. Connect the X rotation of wing T3 to wing T2 and add a minus and drag the peak whip icon over the slider. Okay, repeat the same process for the wing T4 and wing T5. Okay, great. Let's see what we have now in composition window. Great, as you can see, we have 5 duplicated layers that each layer is rotated 0.5 degrees relative to the previous layer. Okay, now I want to repeat the same process for purple layers, but this time I want these layers to be here on the other side of the red wing center object. So make sure you have selected these purple and wing center layers and then press the R key. And now I start from wing down 1 layer. This time I want the X rotation of this layer to be as much as the amount of X rotation of the top layer plus this slider value. So hold the Alt key and click on the stopwatch, delete this code and connect its X rotation to the X rotation of the top layer to have the same rotation value, and then I want to add 0.5 degrees to it. So we have to add a plus sign and then drag this peak whip icon over the slider. Now as you can see, we have this wing D1 layer here at the other side of the red layer with 0.5 degrees rotation. Okay, let's repeat the same process for the other wing down layers. Connect X rotation of wing D2 to X rotation of the top layer. Delete the code, add a plus sign, and click and drag the peak whip icon over the slider. Okay, here we can see these layers rotated to create a 3D wing shape. And finally connect the wing D5 to wing D4. Okay, let's see the result in composition window. Okay, good. As you can see, our 10 layers are beside the wing center layer to form our 3D wing shape. Here you can increase the slider value, for example to number 1. And here we have a thicker 3D wing with more distance or rotation between each layer. Or you can decrease the slider value to have a thinner 3D wing. It's up to you. Okay, let's set it to 0.5 again. Okay, great. This is a good result so far. But if you look closer, you can see that all of the top corners of these layers are in the same line. But I want to add a little bit a smooth edge to the top of the wing shape. To do this, I'm going to use the scale property. Although this process is not necessary, but I suggest you to do it and add more details to your objects, and this will improve your motion graphics production quality in final render. Okay, let me show you how to do it properly. Select wing center and all top yellow layers. Press the S key to load the scale property. Deselect the layers. Okay, our wing center layer should be at 100% scale, but let's rescale other layers. So for wing T1, change the scale value to 98%. As you can see, each layer will be scaled from this bottom corner because we have placed the anchor point in this position. For wing T2, enter 2 units smaller, I mean 96%. For wing T3, again enter 2 units smaller than previous layer, I mean 94%. For wing T4, enter 92%. And finally, for wing T5, enter 90%. Okay, as I don't want to scale these layers in X-axis, so let's hide these scale chain buttons for all layers and change X scale for these layers to 100%. Of course, it's up to you. Now they have 100% scale in X-axis. Okay, now let's repeat the same process for these bottom purple layers. Select them, press the S key, and change the scale from 98% to 90% from the top to the bottom. Hide these chains to unlock the scale axis to be able to change each scale value separately. And finally, change the scale X value to 100% again. Okay, now I want to go one step further. I want to use colors to add more 3D look to the edge of this wing shape. So I'm going to use some colors to create a soft gradient look for the top edge of the wing. In fact, we are going to create something like highlight effect at the top edge of the wing, so your 3D wing objects look more real in the scene. Okay, let's see how we can do it. Let's change the fill color of the wing center object. So let's change it to F6, F6, F6. So the middle layer is almost white now. Now let's add a color to wing T1 using a fill effect. And for this layer, let's enter this code, D9, 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 a bright gray color. And if I zoom in here, you can see that I'm going to create a gradient effect from the center layer to the next 2 or 3 layers. Now let's add a fill effect to wing T2. And for this one, let's add this color, CF, CF, CF. Okay, great. Here you can see a nice gradient effect that will create a highlight effect at the top edge of the wing. Okay, now let's apply these fill effects to the other side. So select wing T1, copy the fill effect into memory. Now select the wing D1 layer that is on the other side of the wing center layer and paste the fill effect. Now copy the fill effect of wing T2 and paste it over wing D2 layer. Okay, now we can go back to our main animate composition. Okay, now I want to duplicate this wing 1 composition 3 times to have 4 wings and to have a wing on each side. First of all, let's move its anchor point to the center of the rocket shape, which is the center of the composition as well. Because if you remember, I moved the rocket layer to 960 and 540 position. To have a visual reference for the center of the composition, let's show the ruler and add a vertical line and 960 position. So, from the menu choose View, Show Rulers, or press Ctrl R. Now let's zoom in a little bit and change the resolution to full. Okay, make sure you have Info panel here. If you can't see it, from the menu choose Window, Info, or press Ctrl 2. Okay, now click and drag from the left vertical ruler to the center of the composition until you see 960 number in X value of your Info panel. Okay, my line is at the center now. Okay, now I want to move the anchor point of the wing shape to the center of the rocket. So, activate Pan Behind tool and move the anchor point in X-axis until you get to this blue line. Zoom in to make sure your vertical green axis, which is the Y-axis, is exactly over the blue ruler line. Now duplicate wing 1 layer 3 times, so from the menu choose Edit, Duplicate, or press Ctrl D. Now let's rotate these wing layers, so select them and press the R key. For wing 1, leave the Y rotation value at 0. For wing 2, change the Y rotation value to 90. Set the Y rotation of wing 3 to 180. And finally, for wing 4, enter 270. Okay, now we have 4 wings and 1 wing on each side. Okay, to see where these wings are on the real 3D composition, let's select the body composition and let's switch the camera to custom view 1. And now let's pan and orbit around the rocket shape. As you can see, these 4 wings are around the rocket object. If we switch to the top view, this is our body layer. Let's change its color. Our body object is here. And these 4 wings are placed around the body object, and we will rotate them around this body object to simulate the rotation of the rocket. To be able to rotate all 4 wings together, I'm going to parent wing 2, 3, and 4 to wing 1 layer. So, activate parent and link column. Select these 3 wing layers and parent them to wing 1 layer. Now let's go back to active camera view. And if I rotate wing 1 layer in y-axis, as you can see, other 3 layers will rotate as well. Okay, for these rocket compositions, I mean highlight, body gradient, windows, and body compositions, don't forget to turn off these rasterize buttons. If they are on, as you can see, we will not have the correct result for the wing layers. In fact, our wings, which is in front of the body layer, will be hidden. So, make sure that rasterize option is off for these compositions. Okay, now let's rotate wing 1 a little bit to check it. Yes, as you can see, when a wing is in front of the body, we can see it, and when it's behind the body, we can't see it. Great. Okay, now let's drag all wing layers and put them at the top of the rocket compositions. So, they have to be at the top of the highlights composition. Let's rotate wing 1 a little bit. As you can see, our wings don't have any thickness. To solve this problem, we should turn on rasterize button for these 4 wing layers. Now if I rotate it a little bit more, here you can see the thickness and the highlight at the top edge of the wing layer, and this adds more 3D sense to our object. Okay, great. Let's change the rotation of wing 1 to 0 again. Okay, now I want to rotate these windows around the body as well, so select the windows composition, and I move it to the edge of the body shape. Let's check it. Yes, it's located exactly on the edge of the body. Now let's rotate it around the y-axis 90 degrees. Okay, now I want to move the anchor point of this composition to the center of the body or to the center of the composition. So, use the pan behind tool and move the anchor point to the center. And place the green y-axis exactly on the blue line of the ruler. Why did I do that? Because I want to rotate this Windows composition around the center of the body shape. Now let's rotate the Windows composition. Okay, as you can see, we have a problem here. I want to cut this Windows layer from the edge of the body composition. So to solve this problem, let's duplicate body composition. Rename it to body mask. Put it at the top of the Windows composition, and let's change its layer color to, for example, to orange. And now click on this toggle switch modes button. And for Windows composition in track matte column, choose alpha matte. Now, as you can see, only that part of the Windows composition is visible that is inside this body mask layer. And so, my Windows layer is cut from the edge of the body shape. Okay, great. Let's hide these 2 columns and click on this small button down here. Okay, now let's rotate Windows layer to 0. And to bring this big window position exactly above this wing, let's rotate Windows composition a little bit, maybe around -10 degrees. Now if I rotate my wings, as you can see, Windows layer does not rotate. How to solve it? Yes, we have to parent the Windows composition to wing 1 composition. Now if I rotate the wing 1 layer, we can see that Windows composition will rotate as well. Great. Okay, now if I rotate wing 1 to, for example, 50 degrees, as you can see, our Windows composition covers this highlight effect, because this Windows composition is not in the same Z position as the highlight composition. If you remember, we have changed the anchor point of the Windows layer and we rotate it, so Z position of this layer is not at 0 value anymore. So, Windows composition is in front of the highlight composition. To solve this problem, select the highlight composition, press the P key, and change the Z position a little bit until you can see it in the front of the Windows layer. Maybe -90 is a good value. Okay, now you can see this highlight at the top of the Windows composition, and it improves your motion graphics level a little bit more. Okay, we have worked on windows, wings, and highlights. Now it's time to work on rotating the wings and windows. So, select Transform Layer, press the U key, and we don't need these two keyframes at frame 0, so let's delete them. So, the rocket returns to its first position. Okay, now as you can see, the only thing that we need to do is adding the rotation to the wings and windows composition. And the only object that we need to rotate is wing 1. Because as you know, other wing layers and also windows layer are parented to the wing 1 composition. So, select wing 1 and open rotation property. Now I want to animate it in y-axis. So let's go to frame, for example, 30. Change the Y rotation value to 0 and set a keyframe. Now let's go to frame, for example, here in frame 110. And let's rotate it. A full 360 degrees and even more, maybe 180 degrees. Let's scrub to see the rotation. Okay. Okay, now let's go to frame around 210. And let's reverse the rotation, so change the first parameter to 0. And for this one, enter 10 degrees. And finally, let's go to frame 250. And let's increase it again to have 2 full rotations and 180 degrees. For now, select these 3 keyframes and convert them to easy ease. Now select the Y rotation property and in Graph Editor. Now here you can create overshoot as well. So select Convert Vertex tool and click once and then click and drag to adjust the handle angle and make an overshoot after this keyframe. And you can change the handle angle for the next keyframe as well. And finally, let's modify this handle for the last keyframe. Okay, great. We have completed the rotation animation as well. Okay, now let's see a ramp preview. Okay, before we finish this video, let's add a few more modifications to the scene. I think it's not bad to bring down this rocket path a little bit, so select Transform Layer, and then select all position keyframes. And using the selection tool, move this animation path to the bottom a little bit. We can lower clouds layers a little bit, so let's select Cloud 4 and press the P key. If I move this layer here in this frame, After Effects creates a keyframe for this position, which I don't want it. So let's delete this keyframe. Click on the position property, and if I move it, After Effects will create a keyframe at this frame again. I don't want it also, so let's delete it again. So let's select keyframes and move timeline indicator to a frame that we have a keyframe, for example frame 0 or frame 300. And then lower the layer. Okay, repeat the same process for Cloud 1 and even for Cloud 2 and Cloud 3. And I think we need to move these line shapes a little bit. They are not aligned with the body of the rocket. So select all line shapes and move them to find the best position. Maybe it's a good idea to offset them a little bit. So select them and move the layers in timeline to find the best frame. And move them to the left to see them a little bit sooner. Okay, we finished the project together, so let's see a ramp preview. Okay, awesome. Nice result.